The crack of a bullwhip echoed through the dusty street of Helena, Montana territory, as Zara Harper stepped off the stagecoach into the harsh reality that would become her new life. The year was 1876, and the promise of marriage that had lured her from Philadelphia now seemed like a cruel joke. Her cream-colored traveling dress was coated with a fine layer of trail dust, and her amber-flecked eyes scanned the crowd for the man who had written such beautiful letters, the man who had promised her a home and a future. What she saw instead was a red-faced drunkard swaying on his feet, barely able to stand as he argued with another man outside the saloon. "That's her, Maxwell. That's the gal I ordered. Cost me $50. The drunk man pointed at Zara, his voice slurring as he took another swig from a whiskey bottle. The well-dressed man beside him, a saloon owner, judging by his fancy vest, and the way he carried himself, looked Zara up and down like she was livestock. "She's a pretty one, Thornton. I'll give you that." "Worth more than $50, I reckon." Zara's heart pounded in her chest. This couldn't be happening. The letters she'd received had been from a purported successful rancher named Thornton Miller. They had exchanged correspondence for months. He had described his thriving cattle operation, his comfortable home, his desire for a proper wife to build a life with. None of those letters had mentioned his apparent fondness for whiskey. "Mr. Miller?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The drunk man gave her a lopsided grin that sent chills down her spine. "That's right, darlin', your future husband, once I sober up a bit." The saloon owner, Maxwell, chuckled. "You ain't sobering up anytime soon, old friend, not with the debt you owe me." He looked at Zara again. "Tell you what, Thornton, I'll forgive your tab all $200 of it and throw in 3 bottles of my finest whiskey if you sign her contract over to me." "What?" Zara gasped, but neither man paid her any attention. "She's worth at least 5 bottles, Thornton argued, taking another swig. Zara couldn't believe what she was hearing. She'd saved every penny from her job as a seamstress to afford the journey west. Her parents had died in a fire 2 years ago, leaving her alone in the world. This marriage was supposed to be her fresh start, her chance at happiness. And now the man she'd traveled over 2,000 miles to marry was trying to trade her for whiskey. "Fine," Maxwell agreed with a smirk. 5 bottles and your debt cleared. Just sign here." He produced a piece of paper from his vest pocket. Thornton scrawled his name on the document with a shaking hand, and Maxwell handed him a bottle of whiskey. "Come along, miss," Maxwell said, reaching for Zara's arm. "You'll be working in my establishment now. I'm always in need of pretty faces to serve drinks and entertain my customers." Zara pulled back, horror washing over her. "I will do no such thing. I came here to be a wife, not a saloon girl." "You'll do as you're told," Maxwell said, his voice losing its false pleasantness. "Or I'll have the sheriff arrest you for defrauding Mr. Miller here. Mail-order brides who take the money and try to run aren't looked upon kindly in Helena." "But I didn't." "Is there a problem here?" A deep voice cut through their argument, and all three turned to see a tall man approaching from across the street. Zara's gaze traveled up a pair of worn leather boots, past denim trousers that had seen better days, to a chambray shirt stretched across broad shoulders. The stranger's face was partially obscured by the brim of a dusty brown Stetson, but she could see a strong jaw covered in a few days' worth of stubble. "This ain't your concern, Holden," Maxwell snapped. "Just a business transaction." The man Holden tipped his hat back to reveal intense blue eyes that reminded Zara of the sky on a clear winter day. "Buying and selling people stopped being legal a while back, Maxwell, even in Montana territory." "I ain't selling a person," Maxwell protested, "just taking over a contract. This mail-order bride belongs to Thornton here, and he's transferring his rights to me." Holden's gaze shifted to Zara, taking in her travel-worn appearance and the fear in her eyes. Then he looked at Thornton, who was already halfway through the bottle Maxwell had given him. "That true, Miller?" "You ordering brides now?" Holden asked. "What's it to you, McCord?" Thornton slurred. "Ain't like you're looking for a wife, Holden McCord." The name suited him, Zara thought absently, still trying to process the nightmare she'd found herself in. "How much did you pay for the contract?" Holden asked Maxwell, 5 bottles of whiskey and forgave a $200 debt, Maxwell said. A fair price. Holden shook his head, disgust evident in his expression. She's worth more than gold, let alone a few bottles of rot-gut whiskey. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a money clip. I'll give you $300 cash for the contract. What? Maxwell's eyes widened at the sight of the money. You're offering cash for her? Zara felt sick. They were still talking about her like she was property. But something in Holden McCord's steady gaze told her he wasn't like these other men. $300, Holden repeated. Take it or leave it. Maxwell snatched the money before Holden could change his mind. Sold. He handed over the paper Thornton had signed. She's all yours, McCord. Didn't take you for the marrying type. I'm full of surprises, Holden said dryly. He turned to Zara, his voice softening. Miss, if you'll come with me, I promise you'll be safe. Zara hesitated. She didn't know this man any better than the others, but there was something in his eyes, a kindness, perhaps, or at least a basic human decency that the others lacked. I have nowhere else to go, she admitted quietly. Holden nodded once, understanding in his gaze. I know a respectable boarding house where you can stay until you figure out your next steps, no strings attached. Why are you helping me? She asked. He didn't answer right away, just picked up her carpet bag and offered his arm. Let's get you settled first, then we can talk. As they walked away from the saloon, Zara could feel Maxwell's eyes boring into her back. She didn't know what would happen next, but at least she wasn't being forced into working at the saloon. For now, that was enough. The boarding house was a neat 2-story building with white curtains in the windows and pots of geraniums on the front porch. A sign reading, Mrs. Abernathy's Boarding House for Respectable Ladies, hung above the door. Mrs. Abernathy is a widow who came west 5 years ago, Holden explained as they climbed the steps. She doesn't tolerate any foolishness, but she's fair and kind to those who deserve it. Before they could knock, the door swung open to reveal a plump woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a severe bun. Holden McCord, she said, hands on her hips. What trouble are you bringing to my doorstep now? No trouble, Mrs. Abernathy, Holden said, removing his hat. This is Miss Harper. She's a mail-order bride who's found herself in an unfortunate situation. She needs a safe place to stay. Mrs. Abernathy's keen eyes assessed Zara from head to toe. What kind of unfortunate situation? Zara lifted her chin. The man I was supposed to marry tried to trade me to a saloon owner for whiskey. Mrs. Abernathy's expression softened. Thornton Miller, I presume? That man hasn't been sober since his wife died 3 years ago, should never have been allowed to send for a bride. She opened the door wider. Come in, child, you look dead on your feet. Zara stepped into a tidy entryway that smelled of beeswax and fresh bread. Holden handed her carpet bag to Mrs. Abernathy but remained on the porch. I've paid for 2 weeks' board, he told the older woman. That should give Miss Harper time to decide what she wants to do next. That's generous of you, Mrs. Abernathy said, her tone suggesting she found it suspicious as well. Just doing what's right, Holden replied. He turned to Zara. I have a small ranch about 5 miles outside of town. If you need anything, Mrs. Abernathy knows how to reach me. Thank you, Mr. McCord, Zara said. I don't know how I'll ever repay you. No need, he said, settling his hat back on his head. Welcome to Helena, Miss Harper. Sorry it didn't turn out to be what you expected. With that, he turned and walked back down the steps, his long strides carrying him quickly away. Well, Mrs. Abernathy said, closing the door, that's the most interest I've seen Holden McCord take in anyone since he came to these parts 3 years ago. Now let's get you settled and fed. You can tell me your story over supper. Zara followed the older woman up the stairs, wondering what twist of fate had led her to this place, and what the future might hold now that all her carefully laid plans had crumbled to dust. The next morning, Zara awoke to sunshine streaming through the curtains of her small but clean room at Mrs. Abernathy's boarding house. For a moment, she was disoriented, the events of the previous day flooding back in a rush of emotion. She was thousands of miles from home with no prospects and no plan. A knock at her door roused her from her thoughts. Miss Harper, Breakfast will be served in 15 minutes, called Mrs. Abernathy's voice. Thank you, I'll be right down, Zara replied, forcing herself to get out of bed. She dressed in her second-best dress, a simple blue cotton that had seen better days, and pinned her long chestnut hair into a modest chignon. As she descended the stairs, the smell of coffee and bacon made her stomach rumble. In the dining room, she found 3 other women already seated at the large oak table. Mrs. Abernathy made the introductions as she placed a steaming plate in front of Zara. This is Miss Jenkins, our schoolteacher, Mrs. Wilcox, who works at the dry goods store, and Miss Peterson, who is the telegraph operator's assistant. The women greeted Zara warmly, and she felt some of her tension ease. At least she wasn't completely alone. Mrs. Abernathy told us about your situation, Miss Jenkins said, passing the butter. It's shameful how some men treat mail-order brides. You're not the first to arrive in Helena only to find your intended wasn't what he claimed to be. Though being traded for whiskey might be a new low, Mrs. Wilcox added, shaking her head. You're lucky Holden McCord happened by, Miss Peterson said. He keeps to himself mostly, but he's got a good reputation. Honest in his dealings, works hard on that little ranch of his. Do you know anything else about him? Zara asked, trying to sound casual. The 3 women exchanged knowing glances. He came to Helena about 3 years ago, Mrs. Wilcox said. Bought a small spread outside of town, raises horses mostly, does some work as a hunting guide for Eastern gentlemen who come out here looking for adventure. Some say he was a lawman back east, Miss Jenkins added. Others think he might have ridden with some rough crowds during the war, but whatever his past, he's been nothing but respectful since he arrived in Helena. And he's easy on the eyes, Miss Peterson said with a small smile. Not that I've noticed, of course. Of course not, Mrs. Abernathy said dryly as she refilled coffee cups. None of you have noticed that tall, handsome man with those blue eyes that could freeze you or warm you depending on his mood. The women laughed, and Zara found herself smiling despite her troubles. What will you do now, Miss Harper? Mrs. Wilcox asked gently. Zara's smile faded. I don't know. I spent nearly everything I had on the journey here. I have some skills. I worked as a seamstress in Philadelphia, and I can cook and keep house. But I'm not sure what opportunities exist for a woman alone in Helena. As it happens, Mrs. Abernathy said, I could use some help around the boarding house. My arthritis makes it difficult to keep up with everything. It wouldn't pay much, but you'd have room and board and a small wage besides. That's very kind of you, Zara said, relieved at the prospect of honest work. It's not charity, the older woman said firmly. I need the help and you need the position. A fair exchange. After breakfast, Zara helped Mrs. Abernathy with the dishes and learned more about her new duties. By midday, she was feeling more hopeful about her situation. She might not be married, but she had a roof over her head and honest work to do. It could be worse. I need to go to the mercantile for supplies, Mrs. Abernathy announced. Would you like to come along, get to know the town a bit? Yes, please, Zara said. And I should send a telegram to my friend in Philadelphia. She'll be worried when she doesn't receive word that I've arrived safely and been married. The main street of Helena was bustling with activity as they made their way to the mercantile. Miners, cowboys, and townspeople went about their business, and Zara tried to take it all in. It was so different from Philadelphia, rougher, more open, with a sense of possibility that both frightened and excited her. At the mercantile, Mrs. Abernathy introduced Zara to Mr. Wilson, the proprietor, and his wife. Another victim of Thornton Miller, Mrs. Wilson said sympathetically when she heard Zara's story. That man should be run out of town for what he's done to you and others. Others? Zara asked, surprised. You're the 3rd bride he's sent for in as many years, Mr. Wilson explained as he measured out flour for Mrs. Abernathy. The first one took one look at him and got right back on the stage. The second poor girl stayed for a month before she couldn't take his drinking anymore. She found work in Butt, I believe. I had no idea, Zara said. His letters were so normal. He wrote about his ranch, his hopes for the future. There was no mention of drinking. He probably didn't write those letters himself, Mrs. Wilson said. Most likely paid someone to do it for him. Thornton wasn't always like this. His wife's death hit him hard. "That's no excuse for what he tried to do to Miss Harper," said a familiar, deep voice. Zara turned to find Holden McCord standing by the door, his tall frame nearly filling the entrance. In the daylight, she could see him more clearly, the strong lines of his face, the slight crinkles at the corners of his eyes suggesting he smiled more than his serious demeanor would indicate, the way his dark hair curled slightly where it touched his collar. "Mr. McCord," she said, feeling suddenly flustered. "Good day to you." "Miss Harper," he nodded, then turned to Mrs. Abernathy. "Madam, I was hoping to have a word with your new boarder, if that's acceptable." "That depends on Miss Harper," Mrs. Abernathy said, ever protective. Zara hesitated only briefly. "Of course, Mr. McCord, I owe you my thanks at the very least. I'll finish up here," Mrs. Abernathy said. "You two can talk outside, but stay where I can see you through the window," she added with a stern look at Holden. He raised his hands in mock surrender. "Yes, madam." Outside they stood in the shade of the mercantile's awning. Zara was acutely aware of how tall Holden was as she tilted her head to look up at him. "How are you settling in?" he asked, his voice gruff but not unkind. "As well as can be expected," she replied. "Mrs. Abernathy has offered me a position helping at the boarding house." "That's good," he said, nodding. "She's a fine woman, tough but fair." "Mr. McCord," Zara began, "I want to thank you properly for what you did yesterday. I was in a desperate situation, and you saved me from something terrible." He looked uncomfortable with her gratitude. "Anyone would have done the same." "But they didn't," she pointed out. "You did, and I'm not sure how I can ever repay the $300 you spent." "It's not about repayment," he said, his blue eyes serious. "I did what was right, that's all. Still, I feel indebted to you." He was quiet for a moment, seeming to consider something. "Actually, there is something you might help me with, if you're willing." "Of course," Zara said immediately. "Anything?" "I have a situation at my ranch," he said, looking slightly uncomfortable. "My housekeeper, Mrs. Gomez, had to leave suddenly last week. Her daughter is expecting a child down in New Mexico, and there were complications. I'm not sure when she'll be back." Zara waited, not quite understanding what this had to do with her. "The thing is," he continued, "I'm expecting some potential buyers to come look at my horses next week. Important men from back east. They'll expect certain comforts, a clean house, decent meals. Things I'm not particularly skilled at providing." "Are you offering me a job, Mr. McCord?" Zara asked, surprised. "A temporary position," he clarified quickly. "Just for a week or two, until Mrs. Gomez returns or I can find a permanent replacement. You mentioned you can cook and keep house." "I can pay you a fair wage, more than you'd make at the boarding house." Zara bit her lip. "I'm not sure Mrs. Abernathy would approve. A young, unmarried woman staying alone at a bachelor's ranch. It would damage my reputation." "You'd have your own quarters, Mrs. Gomez's rooms are separate from the main house," Holden assured her. "And I'd bring you back to town on Sundays for church, so people could see you're being treated respectably. As for Mrs. Abernathy, I think she'd understand this is a business arrangement, nothing more." Zara considered the offer. "The money would certainly help her build up her savings again, perhaps even enough to return east if she decided that was what she wanted. And she did owe Mr. McCord for his help. I'll speak with Mrs. Abernathy," she decided. "If she approves, then I accept your offer." Relief flashed across his face. "Thank you. I know it's not what you came west for, but Mr. McCord," she interrupted gently, "what I came west for turned out to be a lie. I'm just trying to make the best of my situation now." He nodded, understanding in his gaze. "I'll come by tomorrow to hear Mrs. Abernathy's decision. If she agrees, I can take you out to the ranch then." As he walked away, Zara couldn't help but wonder what she was getting herself into. The idea of living at Holden McCord's ranch, even temporarily, made her nervous for reasons she couldn't quite explain. But she owed him, and she needed the money. It was a practical arrangement, nothing more, so why did her heart beat faster at the thought of it? That evening, after much discussion and Mrs. Abernathy's grudging approval, "Only because it's Holden McCord. Mind you, I wouldn't let you go with just any man." Zara packed her meager belongings once more. She was nervous about the arrangement, but also strangely excited for this unexpected turn of events. The next morning, Holden arrived promptly at 8 o'clock in a wagon. He helped Zara load her carpet bag and a basket of provisions Mrs. Abernathy had insisted on sending along. "I expect to see both of you at church on Sunday," Mrs. Abernathy said sternly. "And if I hear even a whisper of impropriety, Holden McCord, I'll have every woman in this town shunning you faster than you can say jackrabbit." "Yes, madam," Holden said solemnly, though Zara caught a glimmer of amusement in his eyes. The ride to the ranch took about an hour, giving Zara her first real look at the Montana countryside. The landscape was more beautiful than she had imagined, rolling hills covered in prairie grass that rippled like a golden sea in the breeze, stands of pine trees along the creek beds, and in the distance, the majestic peaks of the Rocky Mountains. "It's breathtaking," she said, breaking the comfortable silence that had fallen between them. "That's why I stayed," Holden replied, his gaze on the horizon. "Came out here after the war thinking I'd move on eventually, but this land gets in your blood. You fought in the war." Zara asked, curious about this man who had come to her rescue. He nodded. "Union cavalry. Spent 4 years watching men die for a cause that should never have required bloodshed in the first place." His tone made it clear he didn't want to elaborate further. "My father was too old to fight," Zara offered, "but we had neighbors who never came home. It changed everything, didn't it, the war?" "Everything," he agreed quietly. They fell silent again until Holden pointed to a cluster of buildings in the distance. "That's the ranch." "Nothing fancy, but it's mine. Paid for free and clear." As they drew closer, Zara could see a modest but well-built log house with a covered porch, a large barn, several corrals, and a few outbuildings. It wasn't the grand ranch Thornton Miller had described in his letters, but it had a solid, honest feel to it that she immediately preferred. "It's lovely," she said sincerely. Holden looked pleased by her reaction. "It's not much compared to what you probably had back east, but I lived in a small apartment above the seamstress shop where I worked," Zara interrupted. This is wonderful, Mr. McCord." He smiled, then a real smile that transformed his serious face and made her breath catch. "Holden," he said, "if we're going to be working together, you should call me Holden." "Then you must call me Zara," she replied, returning his smile. He nodded, then hopped down from the wagon and came around to help her down. His hands were strong and warm on her waist as he lifted her effortlessly to the ground. For a moment, they stood closer than propriety allowed, and Zara felt a strange flutter in her stomach that had nothing to do with nervousness. Holden cleared his throat and stepped back. "Let me show you around." The tour began with Mrs. Gomez's quarters, a snug room attached to the main house but with its own entrance, containing a comfortable-looking bed, a small dresser, a rocking chair by the window, and a tiny wood stove for heat. "You'll have your privacy here," Holden assured her. "Mrs. Gomez has been with me since I bought the place, so I made sure she had a comfortable space of her own." Next, he showed her the main house, a simply furnished but clean living area with a stone fireplace, a dining table that could seat 6, and a well-appointed kitchen with a large wood stove and ample work surfaces. "Mrs. Gomez left everything in good order," Holden explained. "The pantry is stocked, there's a vegetable garden out back and chickens for eggs. We butchered a steer last month, so there's plenty of meat in the smokehouse." "It all seems very well organized," Zara said, impressed despite herself. This was no bachelor's shack but a proper home. "Mrs. Gomez wouldn't have it any other way," Holden said with a fond smile. "She's been keeping me in line for 3 years, says I'd probably starve to death without her. She sounds like quite a character." "She is. You'll like her when she returns. In the meantime, I hope you'll be comfortable here." He hesitated, then added, "I should show you the barn and corrals too. I have 12 horses, currently 4 broodmares, a stallion, 3 two-year-olds I'm training to sell, and 4 working horses." Zara followed him outside, listening as he explained his breeding program and the qualities he looked for in a good horse. It was clear from his voice that this was his passion, and she found herself fascinated by his knowledge and enthusiasm. The barn was immaculate, the horses beautiful and clearly well cared for. Zara had little experience with horses beyond the occasional carriage ride in Philadelphia, but even she could appreciate the glossy coats and alert eyes of Holden's animals. "They're magnificent," she said, reaching out tentatively to stroke the nose of a chestnut mare who had come to investigate her. "That's Duchess," Holden said. "She's the gentlest of the bunch. If you want to learn to ride while you're here, she'd be a good teacher." Zara looked at him in surprise. "You'd teach me to ride," he shrugged. "If you want to learn, it's a useful skill out here." "I'd like that," she said, smiling at the thought. "I've always wanted to learn but never had the opportunity in the city." They continued the tour, with Holden introducing her to his ranch hand, Pedro, who lived in a small cabin nearby and helped with the horses. Pedro's wife, Maria, sometimes helped Mrs. Gomez with laundry and preserving food, but they had their own home and farm about a mile down the road. "So it really will just be the two of us here most of the time," Zara realized aloud, then blushed when she saw Holden's raised eyebrow. "I mean, I know what you meant," he said. "And yes, most days it will be just us, though Pedro is here from sunup to sundown. But I'm often out working with the horses or hunting, so you'll have plenty of time to yourself." He paused. "If you're uncomfortable with the arrangement, I understand. I can take you back to town." "No," Zara said quickly. "I'm not uncomfortable, just adjusting. This is all very different from what I expected when I came west." "I imagine so," Holden said, his expression sympathetic. "A respectable woman like you coming all this way to be a wife, only to end up as a housekeeper on a bachelor's ranch. It's not what you signed up for." "Life rarely gives us what we expect," Zara said with a small smile, "but sometimes what we get instead turns out to be better than what we thought we wanted." Holden looked at her curiously, as if seeing her in a new light. "That's a wise perspective, Zara Harper." "Not wisdom," she corrected him. "Experience. When my parents died 2 years ago, I thought my world had ended, but I survived and eventually I found a new path forward. This is just another unexpected turn in the road." They stood there for a moment, the air between them charged with something Zara couldn't quite name. Then Holden broke the spell. "I should let you get settled," he said, his voice gruffer than before. "I'll be out with the horses if you need anything." As he walked away, Zara wondered at the sudden shift in his demeanor. Had she said something to offend him? Or was it something else entirely that had made him retreat so quickly? With a sigh, she turned back to the house. Whatever the reason for Holden's abrupt departure, she had work to do. The potential buyers would be arriving in just a few days, and she wanted to prove herself useful. It was the least she could do for the man who had saved her from a fate worse than she cared to imagine. The next few days settled into a surprisingly comfortable routine. Zara would rise early to prepare breakfast, which she and Holden would eat mostly in silence, not an uncomfortable silence, but the quiet of two people still learning each other's rhythms. After breakfast, Holden would head out to work with the horses, and Zara would tackle the housekeeping. She found the work satisfying in a way her seamstress job had never been. There was something gratifying about transforming the already tidy house into a truly welcoming home. She polished the wooden furniture until it gleamed, beat the rugs, washed the curtains, and scrubbed every surface until it shone. In the afternoons, she would bake bread or prepare preserves from the garden's bounty, taking advantage of the late summer harvest. The physical labor left her pleasantly tired, and she slept better than she had in years in the comfortable bed in Mrs. Gomez's quarters. On the third day, true to his word, Holden offered to teach her to ride. They started with the basics: how to approach a horse, how to saddle and bridle Duchess, how to mount and sit properly. "Keep your back straight but not stiff," Holden instructed, adjusting her posture with a gentle hand on her spine. "Relax your legs, the horse can feel your tension." Zara tried to focus on his instructions rather than the warmth of his hand through the fabric of her dress, or the way his blue eyes crinkled at the corners when he approved of her progress. "You're a natural," he said, as she guided Duchess in a careful circle around the corral. "Most city folk take weeks to look this comfortable on a horse." "I have a good teacher," she replied, pleased by his praise, By the fifth day, Zara was confident enough to ride alongside Holden to check on a section of fence that needed repair. They rode at an easy pace, Zara still getting used to the sensation of moving with the horse rather than against it. "How did you learn so much about horses?" she asked as they rode. "My father raised them back in Kentucky," Holden said. "I grew up learning everything he knew. Then the war came and I joined the cavalry because I figured I'd at least be with horses." His expression darkened. "Saw too many good horses die alongside good men. After the war, I drifted west, worked on ranches in Texas and Wyoming, saved up enough to buy this place 3 years ago." "And you've been here ever since," he nodded. "It's peaceful here, no one asking questions about the past or where I've been or what I've done." He looked at her sideways. "Until now," Zara flushed. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to pry. Don't apologize," he said quickly. "It's nice talking to someone. I didn't realize how quiet it had gotten around here until you arrived." The simple admission warmed her heart. "Well, I'm glad to be of service, even if it's just as someone to talk to." "It's more than that," Holden said, his voice low. "You've brought something back to this place that I didn't even know was missing." Before Zara could ask what he meant, they arrived at the section of fence that needed repair. Holden dismounted and helped her down, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. Their eyes met, and Zara felt that same flutter in her stomach that she'd experienced on her first day at the ranch. The moment was broken by the distant sound of a horse's neigh. "That'll be Pedro," Holden said, stepping back. "I asked him to bring some extra lumber for the fence." As they worked on the fence, Holden and Pedro doing the actual repairs, while Zara held tools and handed them over as needed. She found herself watching Holden more than she should. The way his muscles moved under his shirt as he hammered, the competent way his hands worked with the wood, the rare smile that transformed his face when Pedro made a joke. She was attracted to him, Zara realized with a jolt. Not just grateful for his rescue or appreciative of his kindness, but genuinely attracted to the man himself. The realization was both thrilling and terrifying. She had come west to be a wife, yes, but not to fall for the first man who showed her kindness. And yet, there was something about Holden McCord that called to her in a way no man ever had before. It wasn't just his handsome face or his strong hands. It was the gentleness with which he treated his horses, the respect he showed to Pedro and Maria, the way he looked at Zara as if what she had to say mattered. That evening, as they ate the stew she had prepared, Zara found herself studying him across the table. "Is something wrong with the food?" Holden asked, noticing her gaze. "No, not at all," she said quickly. "I was just thinking." "About what?" Zara hesitated, then decided on honesty. "About how different you are from what I expected when I came west." "How so?" "The men who advertise for mail-order brides. They usually want someone to cook and clean and warm their beds," she said frankly. "They talk about partnership, but what they really want is a servant they can also have children with." Holden's face remained impassive. "And you think I'm different?" "I know you are," Zara said. "You treat Pedro and Maria with respect. You talk to me like my opinions matter. You're teaching me to ride because you think it's a useful skill for me to have, not because it benefits you in any way." "Maybe I'm just biding my time," he said, but there was no conviction in his voice. Zara shook her head. "No, you're a good man, Holden McCord, the kind of man I hoped to find when I answered that advertisement." His expression softened. A loud knock at the door interrupted whatever he had been about to say. They both looked up, startled. "Are you expecting someone?" Zara asked. "No," Holden said, rising from the table. "Stay here." He went to the door, one hand resting on the revolver he wore at his hip, a habit Zara had noticed but never commented on. When he opened the door, she heard a familiar voice that sent a chill down her spine. McCord. "I know she's here. I've come for what's mine," Thornton Miller, and from the slurring of his words, he was drunk again. "Go home, Miller," Holden said, his voice cold. "You're drunk and you're trespassing." "That gal is mine," Thornton shouted. "I paid for her. You got no right." Zara stood up, her heart pounding. She moved to stand behind Holden, peering around his broad shoulders to see her erstwhile fiancé swaying on the porch, a half-empty bottle in his hand. Mr. Miller, she said, keeping her voice steady, you sold any claim you might have had on me for 5 bottles of whiskey. I'm not property to be bought and sold. There she is, Thornton exclaimed, trying to push past Holden. Come on, gal, I'm taking you home where you belong. Holden didn't budge. She's not going anywhere with you, Miller. Now get off my property before I remove you myself. Thornton's bloodshot eyes narrowed. You think you're better than me, stealing another man's woman. I'll show you. He lunged forward, swinging the bottle at Holden's head. Holden ducked, then grabbed Thornton by the shirt and physically lifted him off the porch. I said leave, Holden growled, setting Thornton down several feet away from the house. Thornton staggered but caught his balance. This ain't over, McCord, he spat. That woman was promised to me. I got the paperwork to prove it. Paperwork you signed over to Maxwell, who then signed it over to me, Holden reminded him. But none of that matters because Zara is a free woman, not a piece of property. Now get on your horse and go home before you do something you'll regret. For a moment, Zara thought Thornton might attack again. But something in Holden's stance, or perhaps the way his hand rested on his gun, made the drunk man reconsider. He spat on the ground, gave Zara one last glare, then stumbled to his horse and managed to mount it after 2 failed attempts. You'll be sorry, both of you, he called as he rode away unsteadily. Holden watched until Thornton was out of sight, then turned to Zara. Are you all right? She nodded, though her hands were shaking. Yes, I didn't expect to see him again. I should have anticipated this, Holden said, closing the door and locking it, something Zara had never seen him do before. Miller's been telling anyone who'll listen in town that I stole his bride. Most folks know better than to take him seriously when he's drinking, but I should have warned you he might show up here. It's not your fault, Zara assured him. I'm just grateful you were here. Holden's expression darkened. I don't like the idea of him knowing you're out here. Maybe you should go back to Mrs. Abernathy's until Mrs. Gomez returns. No, Zara said firmly. I won't let him frighten me away. Besides, your buyers are arriving tomorrow. You need me here. Holden looked like he wanted to argue but nodded instead. All right. But I don't want you staying here alone until we're sure Miller's not going to be a problem. When I need to go into town or check the far pastures, you'll come with me. I can take care of myself, Zara protested, though she was touched by his concern. I don't doubt it, Holden said with a small smile, but humor me. I'd feel better knowing you're safe. The intensity in his blue eyes made Zara's breath catch. All right, she agreed softly, if it will make you feel better. They stood there for a long moment, the air between them charged with unspoken emotions. Then Holden cleared his throat. We should finish supper, he said. It's getting cold. But the mood had shifted and they ate in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. After they finished the dishes, Holden walked Zara to the door of her quarters. Lock your door tonight, he said. I don't think Miller will come back tonight. He's too drunk to find his way, but just to be safe. I will, she promised. Good night, Holden. He hesitated, then reached out and tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek. Good night, Zara. As she closed the door behind her, Zara leaned against it, her heart racing. Despite the unpleasant encounter with Thornton Miller, all she could think about was the gentle touch of Holden's fingers against her skin and the way he had defended her so fiercely. She was falling for him, she realized. And judging by the look in his eyes tonight, he might be falling for her too. The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying. She had come west to be a wife, but not like this, not so quickly, not to a man she'd known for less than a week. And yet, there was something between them that felt more real than anything she'd experienced in her 22 years. With a sigh, Zara moved away from the door and began preparing for bed. Tomorrow would bring the potential buyers and a new set of challenges. Whatever was happening between her and Holden would have to wait. The next day dawned bright and clear, perfect weather for Holden to showcase his horses to the potential buyers. Zara was up before sunrise, preparing a breakfast hearty enough to satisfy Holden and elaborate enough to impress their guests, who would be arriving mid-morning. You've outdone yourself, Holden said as he entered the kitchen to find the table laden with biscuits, bacon, eggs, fried potatoes, and fresh coffee. The Harrington brothers won't know what hit them. The Harringtons, Zara asked, pouring him a cup of coffee. Are they the buyers? Holden nodded, accepting the coffee with a grateful smile. Thomas and William Harrington, railroad money from Boston. They're looking to start a breeding operation in Wyoming and want quality stock to begin with. If they buy all 3 of my 2-year-olds, it would set me up nicely for the next expansion I've been planning. That sounds promising, Zara said, sitting down across from him with her own plate. What kind of expansion? Holden's eyes lit up as he began explaining his vision for the ranch. More broodmares, a larger training corral, perhaps even hiring another hand to help with the increased workload. Zara found herself drawn into his enthusiasm, asking questions and offering suggestions that Holden received with genuine interest. You know, he said after a particularly insightful comment from Zara about potentially breeding horses specifically for ladies riding, you have a good head for business. Where did you learn that? Zara shrugged. My father was a bookkeeper for a shipping company. He taught me about numbers and planning, and working in a seamstress shop, I saw how the owner managed her business, what worked and what didn't. Well, it's impressive, Holden said. Most women I've known weren't interested in such things. Most women aren't given the opportunity to be interested, Zara pointed out, but I was fortunate. My parents believed girls should be educated the same as boys. Holden nodded thoughtfully. Mrs. Gomez is the same way with her daughters. Insists they learn to read and cipher, says no man will ever cheat them in business. She sounds like a wise woman, Zara said. I look forward to meeting her when she returns. A shadow crossed Holden's face. About that, he began, I received a letter yesterday from Mrs. Gomez's son-in-law. Her daughter's condition is more complicated than they initially thought. She won't be returning for at least another month, possibly longer. Oh, Zara said, processing this information. I see. I understand if you don't want to stay that long, Holden said quickly. It's more than we agreed to, and after Miller's visit last night, I'd understand if you'd prefer to return to town. Zara considered her options. The sensible thing would be to go back to Mrs. Abernathy's and the position she had offered. It would be safer, more respectable, and certainly what society would expect of a young, unmarried woman. But the thought of leaving the ranch, of leaving Holden, made her heart ache in a way she hadn't expected. I'll stay, she decided. If you still want me to, that is. The relief on Holden's face was unmistakable. I do, he said, his voice rough with emotion, very much. The moment was interrupted by the sound of approaching horses. Holden rose from the table. That'll be the Harringtons, right on time. Zara smoothed her apron and checked her hair. I'll clear the breakfast things and prepare some refreshments for when you bring them in. Thank you, Holden said, pausing at the door. For everything, Zara, not just the cooking and cleaning, but for staying. Before she could respond, he was gone, striding across the yard to greet their visitors. The Harrington brothers turned out to be pleasant, well-mannered gentlemen in their 40s, dressed in expensive but practical riding clothes. They were clearly impressed with Holden's horses and equally appreciative of the luncheon Zara had prepared for them. Mrs. McCord, Thomas Harrington said as she served the apple pie she had baked that morning, your husband is a fortunate man. Not only does he have the finest horses we've seen in Montana, but he has a wife who sets a table that would make a Boston hostess envious. Zara froze, her eyes darting to Holden. They hadn't discussed what explanation they would give for her presence at the ranch. Miss Harper is not my wife, Mr. Harrington, Holden said smoothly. She's helping me while my housekeeper is away, but I agree that I am fortunate to have her assistance. Ah, I see, William Harrington said, looking between them with raised eyebrows. My apologies for the assumption, Miss Harper. No apology necessary, Zara said, recovering her composure. Would you care for more coffee, Mr. Harrington? The rest of the visit proceeded without incident. By late afternoon, the Harringtons had agreed to purchase all 3 of Holden's 2-year-olds for a sum that made his eyes widen in surprise. They would send men to collect the horses in 2 weeks' time, along with the full payment. After seeing the brothers off, Holden returned to the house with a wide grin that transformed his usually serious face. They took all 3, he exclaimed, picking Zara up by the waist and spinning her around in his enthusiasm. And at $50 more per horse than I was asking. Zara laughed, dizzy from the spin and from Holden's proximity. When he set her down, his hands remained at her waist and they stood close enough that she could feel the warmth of his breath. "Congratulations," she said softly. "You deserve it. Your horses are magnificent." "I couldn't have done it without you," he said, equally quiet. "The house, the food, everything, you made a real impression on them." "I'm glad I could help," she replied, very aware of his hands still at her waist and the intensity in his blue eyes. For a moment she thought he might kiss her. She found herself hoping he would, but then he stepped back, releasing her with apparent reluctance. "I should check on the horses," he said. "Make sure they're settled for the night." "Of course," Zara said, trying to hide her disappointment. "I'll start on dinner." "We should celebrate your success." As Holden walked out to the barn, Zara watched him go, wondering if she had imagined the moment between them or if he truly had been about to kiss her. And if so, why had he stopped? That night, after a celebratory dinner that included a bottle of good whiskey Holden had been saving for a special occasion, they sat on the porch watching the stars come out. The summer night was warm, with just enough breeze to make it pleasant. "I've been thinking," Holden said after a comfortable silence. "With the money from this sale, I could make some improvements to the house, maybe add a proper parlor, expand the kitchen." "That sounds nice," Zara said, trying to ignore the pang in her heart at the thought that she might not be here to see those improvements. "I've also been thinking about what you said about breeding horses specifically for ladies. It's a good idea. There's a market there that most breeders ignore." "You should pursue it," Zara encouraged. "You have the knowledge and the horses to do it well." Holden turned to look at her, his expression serious in the moonlight. "I'd need help, though, someone with an eye for business and an understanding of what ladies want in a riding horse." Zara's heart skipped a beat. "Are you offering me a job, Holden McCord?" "I'm offering you a partnership," he said quietly. "If you want it." "A partnership?" Zara repeated, not quite believing what she was hearing. "You're smart, hardworking, and you understand what I'm trying to build here," Holden said. "I'd be a fool not to want your help, and, Zara prompted. When he fell silent, Holden took a deep breath. "And I've come to care for you, Zara, more than I expected. More than I thought possible after only a week." Zara's breath caught in her throat. "I've come to care for you too," she admitted. "I know it's fast," Holden continued, "and I know it's not what you came west for. You wanted a husband, a home of your own, not a business partner." "What I wanted," Zara said carefully, "was a man who would respect me, who would see me as more than just a housekeeper or a mother for his children. Someone who would value my mind as well as my other attributes." A slow smile spread across Holden's face. "And have you found that man?" Zara returned his smile. "I believe I have." Holden reached across the space between their chairs and took her hand in his. "I'm not good with words, Zara, never have been, but I know what I feel when I'm with you, and it's something I never thought I'd feel again after the war. You make me want to build something lasting, something good." "I feel the same way," Zara said, squeezing his hand. "When Thornton tried to trade me for whiskey, I thought all my dreams had turned to dust, but now I see it was the best thing that could have happened to me. It led me to you." Holden stood, pulling Zara to her feet and drawing her close. "May I kiss you, Zara Harper?" "I thought you'd never ask," she whispered. His lips met hers with a gentleness that soon gave way to a passion that left them both breathless. When they finally pulled apart, Holden rested his forehead against hers. "Stay with me," he murmured. "Not just until Mrs. Gomez returns, but always." "Are you proposing, Holden McCord?" Zara asked, her heart racing. "Not yet," he said with a smile. "When I do, it'll be proper with a ring and on one knee, but I am asking you to consider a future here with me, as my partner in every sense." "I'd like that," Zara said, joy bubbling up inside her. "Very much." He kissed her again, and Zara felt as if all the pieces of her life were finally falling into place. She had come west seeking a husband and found something even better, a man who saw her true worth, who valued her mind and her heart, who looked at her as if she were more precious than gold. As summer turned to autumn, Zara and Holden's relationship deepened and grew. They rode together daily, with Zara becoming a confident horsewoman under Holden's patient tutelage. They worked side by side on ranch chores, discussed plans for the business, and in the evenings, shared stories of their pasts and dreams for their future. To maintain propriety, Zara continued to sleep in Mrs. Gomez's quarters, though their goodnight kisses grew increasingly passionate as the weeks passed. They attended church in Helena every Sunday, enduring the knowing looks and whispered comments with dignified silence. Mrs. Abernathy, after a stern conversation with both of them, gave her grudging approval of the arrangement, especially after Holden assured her his intentions toward Zara were honorable. The Harrington brothers returned with their men to collect the horses they had purchased, bringing with them the promised payment and an offer to buy more horses in the spring. Holden immediately began work on the house improvements he had discussed, hiring carpenters from Helena to add a proper parlor and expand the kitchen. He also started construction on a larger barn and a second training corral, with Zara's input on every decision. One crisp October morning, as they sat at breakfast, Holden received a letter that made him frown deeply. "Bad news?" Zara asked, noticing his expression. "It's from Mrs. Gomez," he said. "Her daughter is much better, but she's decided to stay in New Mexico permanently. Her son-in-law has offered her a position managing his household, and she feels it's time for her to be closer to her family." "Oh," Zara said, surprised. "Will she be coming back to collect her things?" Holden shook his head. "She asks if we can send them to her. Says there's nothing she needs urgently." "We," Zara repeated, raising an eyebrow. A smile tugged at the corner of Holden's mouth. "Her exact words are, 'Please tell Miss Harper that I approve of her taking my place both in the kitchen and in your heart.'" Zara blushed. "She's very perceptive for someone who's never met me. Pedro writes to her regularly," Holden explained. "I imagine she's heard quite a bit about you." "All good things, I hope," Zara said, suddenly nervous about what the ranch hand might have reported to his former employer. "Very good things," Holden assured her, reaching across the table to take her hand. "In fact, Mrs. Gomez ends her letter by saying it's about time I found a woman who can match me in stubbornness and intelligence." Zara laughed. "I definitely want to meet this woman someday." "You will," Holden promised. "But in the meantime—" He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. "I've been waiting for the right moment, and somehow this feels like it." Zara's heart began to race as Holden left his chair and knelt beside her, opening the box to reveal a simple but beautiful gold ring set with a small diamond. "Zara Harper," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion visible in his eyes. "When you stepped off that stagecoach in Helena, neither of us could have imagined where we'd end up. But these past months have been the happiest of my life. You've brought light and laughter back into my world, and I can't imagine a future without you in it." He took a deep breath. "Will you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Tears of joy sprang to Zara's eyes. "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes, Holden McCord, I will marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit, and then stood, pulling her into his arms for a kiss that promised a lifetime of love and partnership. When they finally broke apart, both breathless and beaming, Holden pressed his forehead to hers. "I love you, Zara Harper. More than I ever thought possible." "And I love you," she whispered back, "my cowboy who saw my true worth when no one else did." They were married 2 weeks later in the small church in Helena with Mrs. Abernathy, the ladies from the boarding house, and a few of Holden's rancher friends in attendance. Pedro stood as Holden's best man, while Miss Jenkins served as Zara's matron of honor. After the ceremony, they hosted a modest reception at Mrs. Abernathy's boarding house. As they prepared to leave for their honeymoon a week in a nice hotel in Butte, where Holden had business with a horse trader, an unexpected guest arrived. Maxwell, the saloon owner who had tried to buy Zara for whiskey, stood awkwardly in the doorway of the boarding house, hat in hand. "McCord," he said, nodding to Holden. Then, to Zara, "Mrs. McCord, I came to offer my congratulations and my apologies." Zara exchanged a glance with her new husband, who looked as surprised as she felt. "Your apologies, Mr. Maxwell." "For how I treated you when you first arrived," Maxwell said, clearly uncomfortable. "It was wrong of me. I've done some thinking since then, and, well, my sister is coming out from St. Louis next month, made me think about how I'd feel if someone treated her the way I treated you." "That's very decent of you to say," Holden said, his arm protectively around Zara's waist. "I also brought a wedding gift," Maxwell continued, reaching into his pocket and pulling out a folded document. "This is the original contract Thornton Miller signed with the bride agency. I'm transferring all rights back to Mrs. McCord where they belong. No woman should be bound by such a thing." Zara accepted the document with surprise and genuine gratitude. "Thank you, Mr. Maxwell. That's a thoughtful gift." "You were right, McCord," Maxwell said, turning to leave. "She is worth more than gold. You're a lucky man." "Don't I know it?" Holden replied, pulling Zara closer to his side. As they watched Maxwell walk away, Zara leaned her head against Holden's shoulder. "People can surprise you," she said softly. "You've surprised me every day since we met," Holden replied, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "And I hope you never stop." They said their goodbyes to their guests and climbed into Holden's wagon for the journey to Butte. As they left Helena behind, Zara couldn't help but marvel at the twists of fate that had brought her to this moment. She had come west seeking a husband and found not only love but a true partner, a man who valued her for exactly who she was. "What are you thinking about?" Holden asked, noticing her contemplative expression. "About how sometimes the worst moments of our lives can lead to the best ones," Zara replied, squeezing his hand. "If Thornton Miller hadn't tried to trade me for whiskey, I never would have found you." "Well, when we get back from Butte, I'll have to send him a bottle of my best whiskey as a thank you," Holden joked. Zara laughed, her heart full of love for this man who had seen her worth from the beginning. "No need," she said. "I have a feeling he knows exactly what he lost." "His loss, my gain," Holden said, bringing her hand to his lips for a kiss. "And I intend to spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret choosing me." "I already know I never will," Zara assured him, leaning against his shoulder as they rode toward their future together. 5 years later, Zara McCord stood on the porch of their expanded ranch house, watching her husband work with their newest stallion in the training corral. The ranch had grown considerably since their marriage, now boasting 20 broodmares, 4 stallions, and a reputation throughout the West for producing the finest ladies' riding horses available. Their Ladies Select line, as they called it, had been Zara's brainchild horses specifically bred and trained for women riders, with smooth gaits, steady temperaments, and the ability to be handled easily by someone of smaller stature. The idea had been so successful that they now had a waiting list of customers from as far away as New York and San Francisco. "Mama, Mama," a small voice called, and Zara turned to see her 3-year-old son, Henry, running toward her, his dark hair so like his father's flopping with each step. Behind him walked Maria, Pedro's wife, holding Zara's 1-year-old daughter, Rose, on her hip. "Careful, Henry," Zara cautioned as the boy clambered up the porch steps. "Did you have a good time with Aunt Maria? We saw baby chickens." Henry announced, his blue eyes exact copies of Holden's wide with excitement. "And how is my Rosie?" Zara asked, taking her daughter from Maria. The baby smiled, showing her 2 new teeth, and reached for Zara's hair. "She is perfect, as always," Maria said with a smile. "Such a good baby." "Thank you for watching them," Zara said. "I got all the accounts finished and the orders sorted out." The business side of the ranch had become Zara's domain, and she had proven to have a natural talent for it. Under her management, they had expanded their customer base and increased their profits significantly. Holden often joked that he'd married her for her mind as much as for her heart. "It is my pleasure," Maria assured her. "Pedro and I love having the children visit. Perhaps next year, God willing, we will have our own." "I'll pray for that," Zara said warmly, having witnessed the couple's longing for a child of their own. Maria said her goodbyes and headed back to her cabin, while Zara settled on the porch swing with Rose on her lap and Henry playing with his wooden horses at her feet. She watched as Holden dismounted and patted the stallion's neck before leading him to the barn. Even after 5 years of marriage, the sight of her husband still made her heart skip a beat. A few minutes later, Holden emerged from the barn and strode toward the house. His face lit up at the sight of his family waiting for him. "There's my crew," he called as he approached, scooping Henry up and tossing him in the air, much to the boy's delight. Then he leaned down to kiss Rose's chubby cheek and finally gave Zara a proper greeting. "How was your day?" Zara asked as he settled beside her on the swing, Henry now perched on his lap. "Good. That new stallion is coming along nicely. He'll be ready for breeding season next spring." Holden tickled Rose under her chin, making her giggle. "And how are my favorite ladies today?" "We finished the accounts for the quarter," Zara reported. "Profits are up 15% from last year. And I received a letter from Mrs. Harrington in Boston. She's delighted with the mare we sent her and wants to commission another horse for her daughter's 16th birthday. See. I told you expanding eastward was a good idea," Holden said, pride evident in his voice. "That's my clever wife. Papa, can I ride Duchess tomorrow?" Henry asked, always eager for any chance to be on a horse. "If you finish all your chores and mind your mama," Holden agreed, ruffling his son's hair. "Maybe we'll even let Rosie sit in front of me for a slow walk around the corral. She's too little," Henry protested. "She's about the same age you were when you first sat on a horse with me," Holden reminded him. "McCord children learn to ride before they can run." Zara smiled at her family, her heart full. From the desperate situation she had found herself in 5 years ago to this moment of pure contentment, it was more than she could have ever hoped for. After the children were put to bed that night, Zara and Holden sat on the porch as they often did, enjoying the peaceful evening and each other's company. "I had a letter from Mrs. Abernathy today," Zara mentioned, leaning against her husband's shoulder. "She says Maxwell is getting married next month, to a widow from Denver with 2 children. Apparently he's become quite the family man." "Wonders never cease," Holden said, his arm around her shoulders. "I wouldn't have believed it if I hadn't seen how he's changed his ways these past few years." It was true. Maxwell had transformed his saloon into a respectable establishment, no longer employing soiled doves or encouraging men to drink themselves into oblivion. He had even become active in the church and town council. "People can change when given the chance," Zara said. "Look at Thornton Miller." After hitting rock bottom, Thornton had finally sought help for his drinking problem. Now sober for 3 years, he worked as a stable hand at the livery in Helena and was slowly rebuilding his life. "Speaking of change," Holden said, "I've been thinking about that offer from the Harringtons to buy a larger parcel of land near their Wyoming operation. It would mean expanding beyond what we can manage here." "You want to move to Wyoming?" Zara asked, surprised. "No," Holden said quickly. "This is our home, but I was thinking we could set up a second operation there, perhaps with a manager to oversee it. It would allow us to breed more horses without overtaxing our land here." "That's an intriguing idea," Zara said, already calculating the potential costs and benefits in her head. "We'd need someone trustworthy to run it." "I was thinking about Pedro," Holden said. "He's more than earned a chance at more responsibility, and he and Maria have been saving to buy their own place someday. This could be a way to give them that opportunity while keeping them connected to our business." Zara smiled at her husband's thoughtfulness. "That's a wonderful idea. Pedro would be excellent in that role, and Maria would finally have a home that's truly her own." "I'll speak with them tomorrow," Holden decided, "see if they're interested before we pursue it further." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. "Do you ever regret it?" Holden asked suddenly. "Coming west, all that happened with Miller." Zara turned to look at him, surprised by the question. "How could I regret anything that led me to you, to our children, to this life we've built together, even being traded for whiskey?" he asked, a hint of old anger still in his voice at the memory. "Even that," Zara said firmly. "Because that's when you found me. That's when you said I was worth more than gold." "You are," Holden said, his voice rough with emotion. "You're worth everything, Zara McCord, everything." He kissed her then, with all the passion and tenderness of a man still deeply in love with his wife after 5 years of marriage. Zara responded in kind, grateful for this man who had seen her value when others had not. As they walked hand in hand back into the house they had built together, Zara reflected on the long, strange journey that had brought her to this moment. She had come west seeking a husband and found not just love but a true partnership, a family, a purpose. She had found a man who believed she was worth more than gold, and in doing so had discovered her own true worth. And that, Zara knew, was the greatest treasure of all.